So the topic in this video is of extreme importance. It is what good interview preparation looks like. And what I see a lot of students doing is that they find questions either online by typing the name of the medical and dental school and then the words interview questions afterwards, getting a source of questions, or maybe from friends who they know have previously attended into medical students, or in some cases, certain groups of friends may pass down, over a period of time, a ever growing list of questions from, this university over the many years. And then the purpose is to grab a friend or a family member, get them to ask you these questions, and just start practicing, start responding to these questions. But how do you know these questions will help you score and stand out in the big day? Are these friends of yours, are these family members of yours professional interviewers? Because if they're not, how would you know that your answer is what the interviewers are really looking for and that you're actually improving as you practice? Well, the short answer is that you wouldn't. And then people look at interviews as if it's some kind of thing where the smarter your answers sound, the better, right? So they start using a lot of big words, a lot of weird vocab that they're normally not used in everyday conversation. They also make it really formal, check the grammar, okay, all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying grammar is not important, but I'm saying that I overly commit to that aspect instead of the most important part, and that's the actual content of your response. And at the end of the day, it's what the content does for the interviewers, for them to add onto their marketing schemes, so that they can actually grade you appropriately for the traits they're after. It's the content that matters at the end of the day. Obviously, other things matter too, such as the way that you're communicating with them. That's obviously a reflection of communication skills. And you generally need to be more or less likable. That's important at a fundamental level. But what it separates you from others is not about the necessarily unique experiences that you have. And that's what a lot of people think about. They think a big part of interviews is going out there and listing all your achievements, academically, socially, whatever, like voluntary work. A lot of people think about chucking experiences to interviewers and hope through the experiences they wow them in some way, shape, or form. Except the fact that they don't. Because at the end of the day, whether or not you've learnt the things that you needed to learn from these experiences is not the same as having done those experiences. Having gone somewhere and volunteered, let's say in a rural part of Australia, doesn't mean that you necessarily have grown in the way that they would like you to have. Okay, so preparation is, I wouldn't say complex, but it's different. So what is in front of me is a very simplified diagram of what I see interview prep needing to be, and that is the 5-step process. So the 5-step process starts off with, number 1, content creation. So the first part of interview preparation is to actually be really, really, really familiar with what the interviewers are looking for in candidates and their responses, of course. So we know from previous videos in this series that it's all about traits, right? It's all about the attributes that you carry, the skills that you possess, the motivations that drive you, the values that you practice every single day, and the goals you have in life, especially in your medical and dental career, that for those to be aligned to what the interviewers look for and see that you'll be successful in overcoming the challenges of the schooling process and later on in the work, environment, is what they're after at the end of the day. Okay, and it's interesting because yes, people gain these experiences and these traits through unique ways, but at the end of the day, you want to have a more or less standardized group of very capable, candidates who get accepted into medicine or dentistry, who all are very, very capable in similar ways because the challenges are similar at the end of the day. So, content creation is where you actually find these traits, right? Empathy, honesty, integrity, responsibility, maturity, the list goes on, problem solving, teamwork, leadership, etc., etc. And you actually create content that is your own content, that is good, authentic, and relevant, right? So What do I mean by this? This is literally when getting, let's say, a trait, empathy, and writing down in your own words. Don't Google this. Don't ask anyone else. Write down what you think empathy is, right? Defining it, right? Through describing from your experiences what you think empathy really means. So we don't want any kind of textbook definition, okay? This is what you come up with. And generally speaking, when you start doing that, you'll realize one thing. It's really hard to articulate exactly what each of these traits mean to you. But after you get over that hump, you realize that each trait, empathy, can be described in more than one ways. And you're right, that's because empathy, well, any trait, works in multiple mannerisms in different circumstances. Being empathetic during a conflict is different to being empathetic when you're talking to someone who is really upset, right? So it changes a lot. So the first part in creating content is that you actually need to start describing it. The second thing you got to do is to talk about its usage. You know, why is it useful? Why is it important to have empathy in the way that you've described? And then finally, you need to start thinking about the instances in which you have experienced maybe really great empathy from someone else, and from that, as a bystander, you realized how significant being empathetic is in helping out with whatever problem you're trying to resolve. It could be that you were a bystander to where there's an argument due to a lack of empathy, and you realize how important empathy is. Or it could be when you are yourself very empathetic, and you realize because of that empathy, you are able to get a group to come together and get them to work together in a constructive manner, whereas before they weren't able to. Or when you accidentally offended someone or did something silly because of your lack of empathy, right? So all these examples will help later on in giving context to how you're able to describe these words. See, some medical schools and dental schools actually straight up ask questions like, tell me about what you think empathy is. Tell me what you think good leadership is. And they will literally just wait for maybe like 1 or 2 minutes to see what you come up with. And if your content is not authentic, it is not well thought through, it is not specific, and it is not varied, it just shows that you haven't experienced much good empathy, or you're not very empathetic, or you're not a very good leader, or you're very narrow-minded in what you think all these traits are. And if someone tells me, well, look, this is all I think about empathy, is that little generic description, that just shows the interviewers that you are probably not very well versed in the importance of empathy. And empathy is a super important skill that all health professionals need to have. So content creation is super, 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 super important, okay? Because if you don't have content creation, and content creation can start now, like as soon as possible, the better your content is and the more work you put into it, and it's something that you write down and you come back to a week later and you go, man, this content's not very good. You add to it, you change it up. It's your baby, okay? It's how you score at the end of the day. It needs to be something that takes a lot of time, right? So content creation is not something that you whip up, okay, during the interview, because I can guarantee you that if you had more time, you could have given better content. If I asked you the question right now, what does empathy mean to you? And you have to respond like now, what are you going to say, right? Compared to if I said, I'm going to ask you this question, what does empathy mean to you in 2 hours time, spend the next 2 hours preparing for that answer. Just because you have more time, you can give a better answer, and that will showcase your understanding better. So if you have, let's say, half a year before an interview, that half a year is very, very important for you to use wisely, right? And this forms the crux of who you are. So you can actually say who you are now, as opposed to kind of going, it's kind of like that thing, like and it's on the tip of your tongue. And a lot of people finish the interviews going, I should have said this instead. And yeah, you should have said that instead. But you didn't, because your content wasn't ready, right? So all that groundwork is what I call content creation. Super important. No one does it, by the way. And because you don't do it, your ceiling of how well you score is capped, is lowered drastically. The better the content, the better the ceiling, the higher the ceiling. So now you move on to stage 2. So stage 2, or step 2, is when you are asked a question, okay, in the interview, and as the question is being asked, you start dissecting it. You start identifying opportunities and figuring out the deficiencies in maybe a scenario question being asked of you, maybe the doctor is being really mean to the patient, not recognizing that the patient's really upset and just being overly, I guess, confrontational in how they speak to them. That is probably going to be an opportunity for you to discuss the importance of communication skills and empathy. Like, identifying opportunity is really important because that sets up the goals of your response. So a lot of people answer questions without having much of a direction. They just like start saying random things, and then because they don't really have a goal, nothing's really ever that compelling. Nor is it very organized, nor is it very comprehensible. So there are all these issues. But if you actually, as you listen to the question or read the question, depending on how you're given, and you start realizing these opportunities, by the end of the question being asked, you already have a short list of maybe 3, 4, 5 traits that you think this question is wanting you to talk about. That then means you can move on to stage 3 or step 3 in going back to the massive pool of content that you've created for all the traits to be like, all right, out of the 20 traits I've written about, these 5 are the ones that this question is interested in. Of all the descriptions / definitions, functions, and examples, which one of these fits best? So you can actually pick the A++ content that's most relevant to this question in this particular form, so that you can have some meat, to your planning. So steps 1, 2, and 3 is what you do after or during and after being asked the question for those couple of seconds. So if it's a multi-minute interview, you have around 1 or 2 minutes, to do a bit of planning. Think about where you want to go with your response, and therefore what content, provided you actually made content beforehand. And the third thing you do before you actually respond, this is the third thing you do during the planning stage, and the fourth step, or stage in this entire process, is thinking about a structure. So structure creation or structure selection, is what you need to really be thinking about. How do I organize my points in a way that is comprehensible, that I'm not going to jump in too deep and the interviewers have no idea where I'm coming from, or I'm going to be way too vague and I have to re-explain myself a trillion times for the interviewers to even get a whiff of what I'm trying to get at? Am I overcooking it? Am I undercooking it? Am I just saying the same thing but in 5 different ways? I'm just repeating myself. See, that's where the actual structure, and what I mean by structure, the order of what you want to say, and maybe, the response that you want to give is quite, you feel quite strongly about. You want to have a more top-heavy approach, whereby you get your point out earlier and you explain it. Or maybe you want to be a little bit more careful in how you respond. So maybe a bottom-heavy approach, whereby you kind of explain your considerations and eventually get to your opinion, whatever you want. But that also needs to be considered, because the order will help effective communication and help you also as the candidate engage as you deliver your response. Okay, what else do I need to say next so that I make more sense? So these 3 steps, 2, 3, 4, is what you do after being asked the question and before you answer. Step 1 is what you do now, and this is what you keep refining on. And that's when you get to stage 5 or step 5, which is delivery techniques. This is when you actually say and speak your response. See, what I see in interview preparation is that people just do 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. They just deliver. But we know that the process of delivering, should be really a execution of the considerations before delivering, which is planning, 2, 3, 4. And also fundamentally what they're looking for, which is number 1, content. So if people are just delivering, and they're not ever aware of 1, 2, 3, 4, it means that they're never able to reflect upon the quality of their responses and know what is maybe letting them down. So maybe it's the fact that they're very good at identifying opportunities, selecting content, and creating good structure, but they haven't really done a good job in content creation. It means that they have no good content anyway. Maybe that's the problem. So they need to work on content creation. Maybe their content's really good, but they have poor understanding of how good structures work, and they don't really know how to use that. So again, it's a structure issue. But the most important thing I really want to talk about right now is something really simple. Right, I like to use these two words to relate to what interview preparation is. And it's similar to how people write essays at schools. See, for people who write great essays, they're very knowledgeable about the topic they are writing about. Okay, not only that, but they're very skillful in converting that knowledge into something that makes a lot of sense. It's persuasive, it's effective, and that's how you get the results. So if you think about it, the people who usually write really well and the people who speak really well is because they have a really good grasp on the response they want to give. So likewise, the interview part, okay, when you respond with a answer is the speaking part. But what determines a good answer? What determines you speaking well? The thinking part beforehand. So you got to really work on the thinking that leads to the speaking. And that's something that is very, very, very overlooked, right? That the best way to prepare for interviews is to know what you need to be thinking about, know why thinking in the steps 1, 2, 3, 4 will help you, experimenting with that, getting used to that, so it can actually help you deliver well. So that when you answer, you'll be fully prepared with 1, 2, 3, 4 already well considered. So you can be really confident in knowing that you're going to have a good time, the interviewer's going to understand you, and you're going to stand out. So therefore, I don't think there's any surprise as to why every single year there are students who have really, really strong ATARs, really strong UCATs, who absolutely get smashed by the interviews because of their lackluster preparation. And that's because they overly simplify the preparation process to really not be constructive, and it doesn't really help them be adaptive in the interviews. And we know interviews change all the time, so that is a bigger factor in, I guess, weeding out students who don't prepare in this particular way. So hopefully it's giving you a little idea of how to be in control, how to really be strategic with your preparation, and not just overly simplify interviews to be any other interview-like encounter that you've experienced in the past, right? But you really have to start thinking about this interview process in a better light, in an informed way, so that you can spend your time wisely.